The millionaire was sad. No one remembered his birthday until the nanny and his children arrived. The Ice Empire. Alexander Grant slammed his phone screen off. 0 messages, 0 missed calls. The clock showed 8 p.m., and the man who controlled half of the most exclusive skyscrapers in New York realized a crushing truth. Today, he turned 35, and the world couldn't care less. His office on the 50th floor was completely silent. Through the immense glass windows, the city sparkled at his feet, but inside his chest there was only an icy void. He had sacrificed everything to reach the top. He had crushed his competitors, multiplied his fortune, and in the process, he had let go of the only person who ever looked into his eyes and not at his wallet. The mahogany door burst open, shattering the silence. In walked Valerie, his fiancée. Designer shoes that cost as much as a compact car, a limited edition handbag, and an expression of absolute annoyance. She didn't even look at his face while checking her own phone. "Alexander, the jet isn't ready for this weekend at your lodge," she snapped with a sharp, demanding voice. "I told you I wanted to go with my friends. What's the point of paying a logistics team if they're useless?" Alexander loosened the knot of his silk tie. He stared at her. He wasn't looking for love in her eyes. He had stopped searching for that long ago, but he hoped for at least a trace of humanity. "Today is my birthday, Valerie," he said in a deep, hoarse voice, hoping the words would stop the world for a second. Valerie paused her fingers on the screen. She looked up for a fraction of a second. There was no surprise, no guilt, just a slight irritation at being interrupted. "Oh, Alexander, please, you're 35. You're not a kid anymore for cakes and candles. Besides, I already made reservations in Greenwich with the girls. See you tomorrow, okay? Leave your black card at reception. Mine's blocked." Without waiting for a response, Valerie turned on her heel and left. The sound of her heels fading down the hallway was all that remained. Alexander stood frozen. A bitter, dry laugh escaped his lips. There was his perfect life. There was the woman he had chosen to bet his future on, the perfect partner for his public image. He was the richest man in the city, but in that precise moment, he felt like the most miserable human being on the face of the earth. He grabbed his navy blue jacket, tailored exactly to his shoulders, and left the building. The drive to his mansion in Greenwich was a silent funeral. As the engine of his sports car roared through the illuminated avenues, Alexander's mind traveled back 2 years. He remembered an honest laugh. He remembered sweet eyes. He remembered Sophia. She used to make him cheap coffee in the mornings when his company was barely surviving. She celebrated his birthdays with a sweet bread and an improvised candle, and he had discarded her like an expired contract when he met Valerie's family and saw the opportunity to enter the true millionaire elite. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Regret was a slow poison. He arrived at his property. The immense black iron gates opened automatically. The Grant mansion stood imposing, minimalistic, with soft cream-toned walls and immense windows. It looked like a museum, a tomb of marble and glass where nothing ever happened outside of the planned. Alexander turned off the engine and sighed deeply. All he wanted was to pour a glass of single malt whiskey, sit on his Italian leather sofa, and let the day end in the most absolute and impeccable silence. He entered the security code on the front door. The electronic lock clicked metallically. He pushed the heavy wooden door, but the silence he expected never came. What hit his ears was a sound that didn't belong in his world, a high-pitched scream followed by a childish laugh that bounced off the high walls of his foyer. Alexander frowned, his muscles tensed. What the hell was happening in his house? He advanced quickly down the main hallway, his heart pounding furiously against his ribs. Natural daylight streamed through the immense windows of his luxury living room, bathing the space in a bright, warm glow that contrasted with his own dark mood. He turned the corner into the main living room, and his feet rooted to the fine wood floor. The air left his lungs in a second. The scene before him defied all logic. It seemed like a hallucination, a head-on collision between his rigid, impeccable world and a hurricane of pure, chaotic life. Right in the center of his living room, on his expensive mahogany coffee table, were two babies. Two small children no more than a year old, blonde with chubby cheeks and eyes sparkling with pure adrenaline. They wore little denim overalls and tiny red sneakers that stomped the polished wood without mercy. But that wasn't the worst. What gave Alexander a mini heart attack was what they were doing. The babies had their faces and hands completely covered in colorful frosting. They were in the middle of a pitched battle, grabbing pieces of an immense birthday cake and hurling them at each other. Pieces of cake, crumbs, and chunks of meringue flew through the air in slow motion. The table was unrecognizable. A white tablecloth that must have been from the formal dinnerware was stained with sweets. There were dessert plates, chocolates, small rolls, and party candies scattered and squashed everywhere. The cake's candles were still lit, half smashed, threatening to fall onto the expensive Persian rugs. It was an absolute disaster, a vibrant, noisy, and strangely tender chaos that profaned his sanctuary of silence. And behind the table, oblivious to the homeowner's presence, was her, a service employee. She wore an impeccable blue maid's uniform with a perfectly ironed white collar, though now splattered with sugar. She had on bright yellow rubber cleaning gloves. Instead of being horrified by the mess, the woman was leaning forward, laughing heartily, a genuine, deep laugh that crinkled her eyes slightly as she interacted with the twins. She was completely immersed in the game, dodging pieces of cake with a radiant, bright smile under the light streaming through the window. Alexander couldn't articulate a word. His impeccable navy blue jacket felt like a straitjacket. He brought both hands to his head in a dramatic gesture of desperation, opening his eyes wide. His jaw literally dropped. He was the most feared tycoon in the country, the man who made bankers tremble, and in that moment, he looked like a petrified statue facing two babies in red sneakers, destroying his living room. "Take that, sugar monster!" exclaimed the woman in the blue uniform, her voice vibrating with joy as she gently wiped one of the children's noses with her yellow-gloved finger. That voice. Alexander's heart gave a brutal lurch. That playful tone, that soft cadence full of spark. He felt the mansion floor disappear under his Italian leather shoes. His breath caught. Blood began to buzz in his ears so loudly that the sound of the baby's laughing seemed to fade into a distant echo. Alexander slowly lowered his hands from his head. His fingers trembled. "What does this mean?" he managed to say, his voice a rough thread that cut through the festive atmosphere like a guillotine blade. The woman stopped laughing instantly. The guffaw died in the air. The maid's back tensed completely under the blue uniform. Slowly, as if she knew the whole world was about to collapse on her shoulders, she lowered her arms with the yellow gloves and began to turn toward him, the ghost in the dining room. Time seemed to stop completely in the impeccable living room of the Grant mansion. The echo of Alexander's choked shout still floated in the air, crashing against the cream-colored walls and the modern art paintings that adorned the place. The woman in the blue uniform stopped breathing. The festive movement, the cake war, the childish laughs, all froze as if someone had pressed the pause button on a movie about to explode. Slowly, with a rigidity that betrayed absolute panic, the employee began to turn on her heels. The bright yellow cleaning gloves, stained with white meringue and colorful sprinkles, lowered slowly until they hung at the sides of her apron. The creak of her work shoe soles against the polished wood was the only perceptible sound. When finally her face was illuminated by the natural light streaming through the huge windows, Alexander Grant's chest received an invisible but devastating blow, a direct hit to the center of his ego, his memory, and his soul. It was her, Sophia Miller. Alexander's world, that empire of skyscrapers, bank accounts with endless zeros, custom-made suits, and high society fiancés, crumbled into 1,000 pieces on the Persian rug that cost more than the entire life of any average person. Her eyes, those unmistakable honey-colored eyes that once looked at him with the purest devotion a human could offer, now they watched him with a mix of horror, disbelief, and a deep, incurable wound. Her brown hair, which used to fall free and wild over her shoulders when they shared that tiny apartment without heat, was now tied in a strict bun, disciplined, fitting for a domestic worker. Her skin, once radiant, looked pale, marked by exhaustion and the harshness of a job that forgave nothing. Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. His knees trembled under his naval cashmere pants. It couldn't be. The mathematical probabilities of this happening were zero. Of all the cleaning agencies in New York, of all the mansions in Greenwich, fate had decided to spit in his face right on his 35th birthday. 2 years ago, he had left her. He simply packed his things in silence one dawn. He left a miserable check on the kitchen table they shared and walked away to sign the contract of his life and commit to Valerie Montgomery. He deleted her number, blocked her social media, erased her from his existence as if Sophia had been a simple miscalculation in his rise to the top. And now the woman whose heart he had shattered was standing in front of him, dressed as his maid, cleaning his mahogany table. Sophia didn't say a single word. Her lips trembled slightly. Her eyes, fixed on the pale face of the millionaire, began to crystallize. The horror of the situation hit her with the same force as him. She didn't know whose house this was. The agency had sent her on an emergency that morning with strict orders.
The owner is never there. Clean. Watch the kids you're allowed to bring today and get out before 8. The silence in the room was so dense it could be cut with a knife. Suddenly, one of the blonde twins, oblivious to the emotional storm destroying the 2 adults in front of him, let out an innocent laugh. He grabbed a huge piece of chocolate cake with his small hands covered in frosting and slammed it against the fine porcelain plate. Crash! The sharp sound of the porcelain breaking snapped the spell. The child babbled, extending his sticky little hands towards Sophia, demanding attention. That simple noise acted as a detonator in Alexander's brain. The shock, guilt, and regret that threatened to bring him to his knees were quickly smothered by the only emotion he had learned to use as a protective shield over the last 2 years: anger, a blind, defensive, savage rage. The mask of fury. Alexander Grant clenched his fists at his sides until his nails dug painfully into his palms. His jaw tensed, marking the hard line of his face. He couldn't let her see how she had disarmed him. Not in his territory, not in his house. He was the owner of everything, the man who answered to no one. He straightened his back, regaining the imposing posture of the corporate predator everyone feared, and took 2 firm steps toward the center of the room. His leather shoes resounded like gunshots. What the hell does this mean? His voice wasn't a shout, it was a low, guttural roar, loaded with a hostility that made the window crystals vibrate. Sophia took a step back on pure instinct, tripping slightly on the edge of the rug. Terror crossed her face for a fraction of a second, but immediately after, her eyes flew to the 2 babies on the table. Maternal instinct crushed any trace of fear. With a quick, violent movement full of wounded dignity, Sophia ripped off the yellow cleaning gloves and threw them onto the cake remnants. She positioned herself in front of the mahogany table, using her own slender body as a human shield between the enraged millionaire and the 1-year-old twins. "I asked you a question," exploded Alexander, losing completely the control he boasted about. He pointed an accusing finger at the mess around him, deliberately ignoring the fact that he knew the woman in front of him perfectly. "Look at yourself, look at my house, look at my living room. Who gave you authorization to come in here and turn my property into a daycare?" Sophia lifted her chin. Her breathing was ragged. Her chest rose and fell rapidly under the blue uniform, but she didn't look away. Her honey-colored eyes, once scared, now shone with a burning fury, a strength Alexander had never seen in her when they were together. "The luxury service agency sent me this morning," Sophia replied. Her voice trembled on the first syllable, but she quickly found her center. It was a cold, cutting voice, devoid of any past affection. "They hired me on an emergency shift. They told me the owner wouldn't be here all weekend." "Well, they lied to you," spat Alexander, closing the distance between them. The vein in his neck throbbed visibly under the immaculate collar of his white shirt. "This is my house, mine, and I don't pay thousands of dollars to a security agency to let just any employee in with... Alexander stopped his words short. His dark eyes, injected with a mix of rage and desperation, shifted for the first time from Sophia to the table. The 2 small children. Both were now looking at him in complete silence. Their big round eyes, framed by messy blonde curls, were fixed on the giant in the blue suit who was yelling. One of the twins, the one with the overalls most stained of chocolate, let out a small pout, scared by the volume of the man's voice. Alexander felt a block of ice settle in his stomach. He tried to swallow, but his throat was dry as sandpaper. "Whose are those kids?" asked Alexander, and this time his voice didn't sound like a roar, but like a dangerous hiss, the tone of a man about to discover that the ground under his feet is a minefield. Sophia gritted her teeth. Her hands flew instinctively backward, touching the baby's small legs to reassure them that she was there, protecting them from the monster in the suit. "That's none of your business, Mr. Grant," shot Sophia, using his last name as if it were an insult, a verbal slap that resonated throughout the room. "The authorized kids to come with me by the house administrator."
"If you have a problem with the service, call the agency and fire me. I'll clean up this mess in 5 minutes and get out of your perfect, empty life." Alexander felt the blow of the word empty. It was as if she could see through his $1,000 suit straight to the miserable loneliness he had felt in his office just an hour ago. He took another step toward her, ignoring her warning. His gaze was no longer on Sophia. His gaze was locked like a laser on the face of the twin sitting on the left. The child looked at him with curiosity, having overcome the initial fright. He tilted his little head to one side. Alexander stopped breathing. That way of looking, that head tilt, the exact shape of the lower jaw, even hidden under baby fat and vanilla frosting. It was like looking into a time-warped mirror. It was like looking at a photograph of himself 34 years ago, a photograph his late mother kept in an old drawer. "I said, Alexander lowered his voice to a terrifying whisper, his eyes fixed on the child, his mind working at a dizzying speed, calculating dates, counting months backward with a precision that was driving him mad. Whose are these kids? Sophia. The name escaped his lips before he could stop it. The pronunciation of those 5 letters shattered the professional barrier both were trying to maintain. Upon hearing her name and that deep voice that once swore eternal love to her, Sophia closed her eyes for a second. A solitary, traitorous, inevitable tear slid down her pale cheek. She opened her eyes suddenly, defiant, ready to take her secret to the grave before giving that man the satisfaction of the truth. But before Sophia could launch the lie she had prepared on the tip of her tongue, the sound of a throat clearing at the entrance of the hallway made both turn their heads sharply. And standing in the threshold of the destroyed room, with hands clasped behind his back and an expression of solemn serenity, was Mr. Arthur, the general administrator of the mansion, the man who had served the Grant family for 40 years. Mr. Arthur looked at the destroyed cake, at the baby's smeared faces, at Sophia's contained tears, and finally rested his old, wise eyes on his patron's decomposed face. "It was me, Mr. Alexander," said Mr. Arthur in a calm voice that contrasted violently with the tension in the room. "I let her in. I authorized the children, and I think it's time you stopped yelling because you're scaring your birthday guests." Mr. Arthur's move. Alexander turned his neck with such violence that a dull pull ran down his spine. His dark eyes, lit with a mix of rage and absolute confusion, locked onto the old man who had just spoken. Mr. Arthur didn't back down. At his age, dressed in his impeccable gray administrator suit, he was the only human being in all of New York who wasn't afraid of Alexander Grant. He had seen him grow up, seen him fall off his bike at 5 years old, and more recently, seen him sell his soul for a bank account with too many zeros. "What did you just say, Arthur?" Alexander's voice was a lethal whisper, a thread of voice that scraped his throat. The old administrator took a step forward, crossing the threshold into the destroyed room. His shoes made no noise on the wood. His posture was straight, dignified, unbreakable. "I said I brought her, Mr. Alexander. I pulled the strings with the service agency this morning. I demanded they send Miss Sophia specifically, and I authorized her to bring the little ones under the excuse that the house would be empty for your birthday." Alexander's brain seemed to be short-circuiting. He looked at Arthur, then at Sophia, then at the babies, and finally back at Arthur. "You're fired," roared Alexander, corporate instinct taking control in the face of betrayal. "Get out of my house right now. Both of you, get out." But Arthur didn't even blink. "I'll go if you order me to, boy, but first you're going to listen to me. Today is your 35th birthday. I arrived at this house at 6 a.m. I saw your fiancée, Miss Valerie, leave in a hurry, complaining that they hadn't prepared the private jet for her to go partying with her friends. I saw your personal phone on the desk in the study, plugged into the charger, without a single notification. No one from your prestigious board called you. No one from your golf club came to visit. You built an empire of glass, Mr. Alexander, but you're completely alone inside. You're freezing to death in your own palace." Arthur's words hit Alexander like hammer blows to the chest. They were the absolute truth, raw and without anesthesia. "That doesn't give you the right to bring her into my house," shouted Alexander, pointing at Sophia without daring to look at her directly. "You betrayed me." "I saved you from yourself," corrected Arthur with implacable calm. "I checked the records of the city's agencies months ago. I knew Miss Sophia was working from dawn to dusk cleaning other people's floors, and I knew you, though you'd never admit it, haven't slept a full night in peace since the day you abandoned her." Sophia couldn't take it anymore. The sound of the word abandoned broke the dam of her self-control. She grabbed a damp cloth from the table and with violently shaking hands began to clean one of the twins' faces with almost desperate force. She wanted to erase the cake, erase the evidence that they were there. She wanted to become invisible. "Enough!" shouted Sophia. Her voice echoed off the high walls loaded with fierce, wounded dignity.
Don't talk about me like I'm a charity project, Mr. Arthur. You lied to me. You told me the owner of this house was a foreign businessman. If I'd known this floor belonged to him, I'd preferred my children and I starve on the street before crossing that door. Alexander felt like a bucket of ice water had been dumped over his head. Starve. That phrase stuck in his brain.
Alexander confronts Sophia about the check he left, bewildered by her mention of hunger. She reveals she tore it up, refusing money from the man who abandoned her for social status. As she prepares to leave with the twins, Alexander blocks her path, fixated on their uncanny resemblance to him. Demanding their age, he learns they're 1 year old, triggering a devastating calculation. She was pregnant with his twins when he fled 21 months ago. Overwhelmed, he questions her silence. Sophia unleashes her fury, detailing her hardships to protect them from a cowardly father. Valerie storms in, appalled by the chaos, hurling insults at Sophia and calling the children disgusting bastards. Alexander erupts, defending them as his sons, cancels the wedding, and ejects her, indifferent to the fallout on his empire. In the aftermath, Alexander begs for details. Sophia confirms the twins, Leo and Matthew, are his, recounting her solitary pregnancy, grueling labor jobs while starving, and isolated birth, all to shield them from him. Shattered, Alexander offers his fortune to fix it, but Sophia rejects him as unchanged and hollow. As she departs, he collapses, crawls after her, and pleads on his knees, confessing his empty life and begging for a chance at fatherhood. Sophia's defenses crack. She warns of no mercy for failure, but allows him to hold the boys, who playfully smear him with cake amid his tears and laughter. Mr. Arthur lights a salvaged candle for his birthday. Alexander, cradling his sons, blows it out, embracing ruin as the price of rebirth. Through this harrowing journey, the story teaches us profound lessons, that true wealth lies not in material empires, but in the bonds of family and genuine love. That redemption requires humility, accountability, and consistent action over empty promises, and that prioritizing superficial success can lead to profound isolation, reminding us to nurture relationships before it's too late. In losing his glass throne, Alexander unearths a dynasty of flesh and blood, one that no merger could buy. The empire crumbles, but the real conquest of self-forgiveness and familial healing begins. Please kindly subscribe to Echoed Tales for more interesting stories like this. Thanks.